I didn't realize something.
Okay. Okay.
Namaste and greetings. I, Anshul Karnani, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on local governance and the Union Budget 2023-24. This discussion is organized by the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, Local Governance. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2023-24 being organized from 2nd of February to 7th of February 2023. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our chair and moderator for today's session is Shri Tikender Singh Panwar, a former Deputy Mayor, Shimla and Senior Fellow at IMPRI. The panelists for today's session are Dr. Joy Elamon, Director General at KILA Institute of Local Administration, Thrissur, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, retired IAS and Secretary, Government of Himachal Pradesh, Mr. Srinivas Alavilli, renowned urban expert, Dr. Joy Elamon, Thematic Lead, Fiscal Decentralisation, Center for Budget and Governance Accountability, New Delhi, and Mr. Sameer Unhale, Urban Practitioner and Expert and Visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Shri Tikender Singh Panwar to start the program. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anshul, for this lovely introduction, and I welcome all our panelists here and also all those who have joined us online. And perhaps we'll have a Q&A also once we are over with the discussion. So the first round would be where the speakers would speak for 8 minutes, I guess, and then we can have another round if time permits, and then of course Q&As to be addressed to the panelists. Now what I'm going to do is, because this is such an important topic, and this is being discussed almost in every nook and corner of the country, the Union Budget, which is such an important document, because 1 year down the line, 2023-24, how are we going to shape our kitchen, our cities, the developmental trajectory, the vision, and all of that actually gets reflected in the budget document. Having said that, I think it is also time, because this is the last budget of the current dispensation, the full budget of the current dispensation, because we will be going to the elections in 2024. And, there were promises from 2 crore jobs to be created annually, house for all, sanitation for all, and, cities was supposed and meant to be the so-called engines of growth. And some of the models, like the smart city model, were supposed to be the lighthouse houses for urban development in the country. We do not have time to discuss all of that, but definitely I think it is also time to go back to almost 3 decades when we had this major disruption taking place in the Indian economy, and the first budget that was presented by Dr. Manmohan Singh in 1991 was what I say was a kind of shift in India's economy away from the hands of the government to the hands of private enterprise, and that embraced free trade. In fact, that continued till date. In between, we have seen n number of interventions that have happened across the globe, because this whole idea of market coming in and ameliorating our problems of infrastructure, our problems of housing, etc., has actually not given any dividend. And we have seen this trajectory taking place in some of the developed nations, where they've gone back to what And in Indian context, I would say, spending on the social aspect, on the social sector. But what I could gather from this budget, and particularly if I look from the wing, one of the wings of urban development, is that there is, this paranoia about capital investment, more capital expenditure would have a trickle-down effect, continues to be the guiding framework of the current budget that was placed by Madam Nirmala. So, so we have experts, we have interesting people who are here, who would be actually who would be digging into this budget, and especially from the city perspective. I'm sure that they are going to go into more details. But just to have, let me come to some of the figures. After all, it's important that we review, because this is going to be the last budget of the current dispensation, as I've already said. If you see the first budget, 2009-10 to 2013-14, this total central government expenditure in relation to GDP has kind of fallen. It's not really gone up. Of course, the volume has gone up, but it was 15% at that during that period. And of course, during NDA 1, it came down to 12.8%. Currently, it's just 14.9%. So you don't find a substantial increase in spending as far as the budget is concerned. Likewise, in urban development, if you see, maybe I don't stretch back to 2009-10, but 2021-22, there's a substantial cut. It was 0.5% of GDP, and it's gone down to 0.3% of GDP in the current. The only rise you find is once, and that's what I've tried to mention in the beginning, is in the capital expenditure that jumps from 2.5% of GDP to 3.3%. How is it going to affect? And interestingly, why I was like really a little concerned about this figure, because when I look at the urban development, most of this capital expenditure, not just more, but a chunk of this capital expenditure, almost 30%, goes into the construction of metros. So almost 30 to 35% metros, and we know how limited that space and scope is. So this push for capital-intensive technologies that started, that was embraced, say, maybe a decade or two back, continues to be the guiding principle, and that this is what we are finding in Swachh Bharat Mission, even in water and many other utilities where urban is an important element. And if you see the total budget, the proposal that was there in 2022-23, that was 76,549 crores. It's come down to 76,431 crore. And if you add inflation to that, you can easily understand what does this mean. So so I think capital intensive means what? According to me, I think it means benefits to large corporates who have already entered this arena in the form of consultancies, in the form of technologies that are being trusted upon cities, and then you ask citizens to pay back in the form of user charges, be it water utilities or other utilities. PMAY, I mean, we've seen that there's a huge jump in Awas Yojana, but unfortunately in PMAY urban, there's a drastic cut. So I don't understand, because have we just given away, or what does sustainable housing mean? Does it mean just the transit-oriented development that the finance minister talked about? And there's a substantial decrease in PMAY from almost 59,963 crore to almost 28,708 crore. So it's a substantial chunk that you can find. I mean, that has taken place. So where are we headed through this? And then the smart cities vision, it doesn't even find a word in the budget speech, and we can see the figures. What I mean, last before I jump to the panelists, apart from misplaced priorities, I think what this budget would have addressed, when we're talking about 17 SDGs, climate change and its impact, what ma'am was saying when we initiated the discussion, what some of the important areas? At least you could have given some budget for preparing some disaster mitigation plans in the cities. We don't find even an iota on that, not even a word on as if disasters do not strike the cities. The capacity building is completely gone. Urban employment guarantee could have been another very important area, which is completely out of all this. And so it's more of a technological, artificial intelligence kind of driven framework which has guided particularly the urban development sector, which according to me is not necessary. I mean, I should have kept these remarks for the when the panelists concluded their remarks. But this is open to you. I mean, you don't have to buy what I'm saying, but please go ahead the way you have understood this budget, your experiences, because we have Srini who knows a lot about democratic decentralization. I don't find a word about the democratic decentralization, empowering the cities. So it's, where are we? I think it's a real quagmire at the crossroads, and it's a complete myopic vision through which I look at this budget. Over to you, Anchal, and you can take the floor. Please invite the panelists, and please, I request the panelists to follow the timeline, because we have what, 5 or 6 people, all eminent, and I'm so grateful Dr. Purnima has joined, because I was sworn in by her when she was the Director of Development. I became the Deputy Mayor at that time. Thank you, ma'am, for joining this discussion. So looking forward to very interesting and very powerful, energetic views from all our panelists, who are like doyens amongst themselves in the field, and they have done I don't have to go beyond that. Oh, Srini, I can see you. Great. So yeah. So I think over to you, Anchal. I mean, I'm extremely sorry for such an extended introduction, because I wanted to do that. Purposely, I wanted to do that, because I couldn't have left that out, because we just kept it to the end. But the panelists are completely free. Please go ahead the way you anticipate things to unfold in the year we have ahead. Thank you so much. Please.
So
Thank you, sir.
we start with Purnima. Yes, Anchal. Yeah. Purnima ma'am, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Tikender ji, I didn't know about your bicycle skills at that time when I was Director of Urban Development. So in the beginning, being part of this illustrious panel, thanks to you and Arjun ji. And of course, I invite you as well as everybody else to be cycling in this area right behind me, which is really pretty. And I just hope that this doesn't fall prey to the kind of urbanization that we see all around us, and especially in the mountain areas. And in addition to all the categories that you mentioned as critical and missing, the mountain areas don't find any mention anywhere in a one-size-fits-all attempt, which I have actually, I remember arguing this during the JNNURM meetings when I was Director of Urban Development, and saying at the outset, let me say it for the mountain areas, because I'm sitting in a mountain area, that where do they factor in when they take population as a criteria for a parameter to grant anything? Where do they factor in the floating populations? Shimla, by default, was a city under JNNURM simply because it was a capital city. And this point was actually taken very well by late Mrs. Ishar Ahluwalia. But since then also, I don't think much has changed. So much water down the bridge. And as we look at the manthan that has happened to bring out this Amrit for the Amrit Kal, and also the Sapt Rishi, we are sitting in the Valley of Gods. So I hope all the Rishis are over here. So I will start with the fact that this is the first budget, as you said, in the Amrit Kal, and for the next 25 years, we just hope that along with the trajectory of vision that is there, and I must say that the budget does outcome mapping, which is a welcome step. Let us hope that tenures are also guaranteed. Now, this is a very major concern which I'm flagging at the outset, because I remember as Director of Urban Development and Director Town and Country Planning, if you start something and you don't have the tenure to see it through, urban, as you mentioned, a very complex area, you will invariably not develop a deep enough interest in the verticals and not be able to deliver on the horizontals or the verticals. The complexities I will come to subsequently, because figures, the devil lies in the detail, and I'm sure that there are such illustrious experts over here that I am actually on the learning curve and fortunate to be here. So this year's budget actually continues with the reforms which were started and which were actually kickstarted perhaps by the 13th Finance Commission. And then in the last year's budget also, the municipal reforms and the incentivization packages for the states and urban local bodies. Now, the last mile is a welcome step. So is inclusion, a very important word. But when we go along and we see the schemes, is there an effort at exclusion or inclusion? The merger of plan and non-plan in 2019 obscured a lot of things, which seems to be an attempt at exclusion and could be projected as inclusion. I'll leave it to the other panelists. Now, a very small but interesting thing is that in Ayush, in the last mile, you have the Bharat Shri, ancient scripts digitization, and I'm mentioning it right at the outset because it's such a small point that may be missed, but it is a great opportunity for employment as well. The recognizing culture has been done already globally also and by Niti Aayog as a fourth pillar of development. So when we mention in a tourism state like Himachal, where our local floating population, which was also flagged with the JNNURM, that our floating population is 3 times our local population. So when we make infrastructure, who are we making it for? It cannot only be for the local populations. It definitely is for tourism as well, which contributes 7% of the GDP of this state. So while appreciating the architecture, the 7-pronged Saptarishi, what is very important is, as Tikender just mentioned, that focusing only on capex, capex, capex. I mean, is the trickle down and the multiplier to the triple bottom line, is it so robust? Is it so vibrant? And that does the accounting framework lead down to the profit, people, and the planet, which translates into pervasive, equitable access to social well-being? Is it an afterthought? But is it closely aligned to the global SDGs? We will come to localizing of the SDGs and leaving no one behind, which is obviously said in the inclusion spirit. But the tier 2 and tier 3 cities is where the action is. So even if the budget focuses on those, leaving something to trickle down, we are first of all ignoring the bottoms up approach of Robert Chambers. And today, with an aspirational, young, tech savvy society, yes, there is an impetus for bottoms up, and let us not ignore it. But at the same time, in each scheme after scheme, where is the feedback loop? Where is the evaluation inbuilt into the scheme? Are the administrative overheads and IEC components adequate in those schemes? These are the things that we look for. Because as an administrator, I can as easily prepare a scheme, prepare a policy, prepare an action plan, and just leave it at that. Because by the time there is some sort of evaluation, I will not be there. So where is my ownership? So what does that lead to? Now, as a policymaker and a planner and an implementer also, it leaves me with a nagging doubt and a guilt that am I infusing trust, or am I creating to the already low the trust deficit that prevails in this country? So now, in order to mitigate that also on the face of it, while talking of environment, health, economic justice, PMAY, which very rightly Tikender just mentioned, is a shocker, that where it gives 13% increase to rural areas, it gives a 13% reduction to urban housing. So, and talking of capex, 10 lakh crores, is it likely to reduce the trust deficit or will it increase it? As far as MSME is concerned, the budget definitely has these 39,000 compliances which have been removed for the MSME, which is good. More than 100 offenses decriminalized in a bid to promote ease of doing big business. Now, these are things which in Himachal, and I'll keep on giving examples from Himachal to illustrate what I'm saying, that the Public Service Guarantee Act, which is not only exclusive to Himachal Pradesh, since 2011, it is prevalent in most states. And Sakala in Bangalore has been PM awarded also in 2012. So this Public Sector Guarantee Act guarantees not quality of services, not cost of services. It only guarantees one thing, that is timely delivery of services. Now, without sounding like a fifth columnist, let me tell you that as Secretary AR, when I was making a push for the Public Service Guarantee Act so that citizens and the category of industrialists and others get services in time, whether those are relating to electrical connections or to clearances on land and other things which were notified, I was told by the higher authorities, why are you making such a push for this? So then I had to reply that if you want to stop me from doing something which is citizen-centric and which is the rights-based regime, kindly pass orders on the file. Now that is a kind of obstacle that we come across and can't speak about. Now that doesn't create trust in any case. Why is this lip service so prevalent? Even if it is not espoused clearly in budget after budget, having old wine in new bottles, we face it on a daily basis when we are implementing schemes, designing schemes and strategies. Now, very important to say before we go on to the scheme-wise analysis is that what is extremely important is capacity building. Now, when we look at cities as engines of growth, we look now at tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which are reporting anything as phenomenal as 40% growth. We need to have capacity building programs, and these will certainly not trickle down. They have to be customized. They have to make an assessment of what is the current capacity and what are the capacity needs. Now, let me backtrack to Himachal. When this was about 10 years, 12 years ago, when we took over, when I took over urban department, I realized that there was absolutely no training program in place for elected representatives. And I think Tikender ji will bear me out that this was horrifying, that for 5 years, those people who are elected by the people, their trust is reposed. Again, we are talking of trust deficit. The trust is reposed in them, and trust is reposed in different categories of people, from women, to mainstream gender. Those who have never stepped out of their houses, how do they just expect that with a snap of fingers or with taking of the oath, they will be able to deliver? There was no mechanism of any sort of imparting of training to them. What would they do for 5 years? Does the law anywhere say that ignorance is a plea that can be legitimately taken? Certainly not. Hence, what I did, I started off, talked to an institute in Chandigarh and designed a capacity building program, which was in 2 parts. One was the orientation, and the second part would be in the second round when everybody's gone through orientation, scheme-wise refresher courses, specific courses. And initially, the hurdle that we came across, it may sound amusing to those who are living in other states which are very metro-oriented. The women said, we have never seen anywhere anything more than the nearest city around us, or nearest town rather. So how can we go to Chandigarh? Now, to overcome this obstacle, I said, okay, you want to go with your husbands? We will fund them, they can go free. So we overcame that, and it was a pleasure to get the feedback from them that not only did they enjoy seeing a city which was so well planned and they were taken on a field trip, they also enjoyed getting inputs that they never thought of. So their entire perspective on how will they manage their urban local bodies or how will they extract work from their officers, it changed completely. And since it was done in the beginning of their tenures, I think it did reap the benefits. And that was the time when the 13th Finance Commission conditionalities were coming into place. And hence to implement, to enforce them needed very close marriage between the polity as well as the administrators in the urban local bodies. So this was very timely, but it's a different thing whether it's sustained beyond that, because I know for sure the Government of India came out with a capacity building program, which was, I think the perks and the salaries were very good, something like 75,000 rupees a month. But good intentions fall by the wayside, because after my tenure, when I saw that the people who were engaged in that were certainly not the best, or certainly not what the market could have thrown up. And in fact, in the Administrative Training Institute, where we wanted that at least 5 people from different specialities which are vital to urban development should be there, that money was not being released by the directorate. Now, this cross linkage was extremely important because the directorate will have a different perspective. The Administrative Training Institute will bring together what IMPRI is doing today and perhaps benefit from institutions like this, which have such a rigor of analysis and drill deep. Now, so when the directorate did not give that, I had become director of the ATI. I moved to get a HUDCO chair, and we did. Within 6 months, we had a HUDCO chair over there with 20 lakhs funding. Now, it's not good enough to just get the chair. What was the chair going to do? What was the focus of the trainings that they were going to impart? That should have been in tandem with the department, and not just urban development, but town and country planning for spatial planning also, because both are very closely linked. That was a very tedious exercise. And today it's, I feel sorry to hear that the HUDCO chair is languishing after, having established it in super quick time. Now that is where, we leave a slice of our heart in the department that we hold, and perhaps try to come back in a different way to make sure that good intentions don't fall by the wayside. The other initiative that capacity building, I'll come back to later, because this is a continuous learning, not just for the urban local bodies, but all for practitioners, and to have common platforms where researchers, practitioners, and administrators all come together. This is also flagged in the 1997 Human Development Report of the World Bank, where it said that the role of the state was getting overextended. And as we just mentioned, that India was transiting towards the first generation reforms and then the second generation reforms in the 90s. And hence the state in its excitement, and of course, in order to preserve the foreign exchange reserves and boost them, was taking on much more than it could chew. In any case, the changes to the 73rd and 74th Amendment also were part of this decade. Hence, I would say that the role playing was not so clear for the local bodies, and much against what they wanted to do, perhaps. The core areas of the state were languishing, whereas the state started venturing into tradables and non-tradables, which are best left to the private sector. At least the tradables are best left to the private sector on the periphery of governance. The non-tradables could be sectioned off with, elements that could be privatized, and the others left to the government. But then how did the government do that? And the answer comes from Fukuyama, that this overextended state, Fukuyama interpreted in his very interesting work, seminal work, End of History, where he felt, in a very Marxian way, he felt that the state no longer has a role to play and everything is hunky-dory, and a stateless society will happen. I'm sure Marx would have been very happy to hear that. But he had to eschew his forecast in his other work, which came after a few years, that is Role of State, in which he withdrew his previous statement and said that the changing role of the state will remain. It has to reinvent itself to oversee development from an arm's length. And that is exactly what is needed today when we look at urban local bodies also, as a facilitator and regulator through decentralized modes that places the service delivery ball squarely in the court of local bodies. However, if funds, functions, functionaries are not adequately provided, I'm afraid, despite legislation, despite the best of intentions at some levels, the fear of losing control, political control over the same vote bank, prevents states from doing maximum kind of decentralization or delegation, which would otherwise improve local accountability, improve the current prevailing trust deficits, improve the performance, and no need of the top-down multiplier trickle down. It would also ensure that entrusted ULBs start understanding the role playing and start realizing that they have to deliver. That was exactly the intention behind the 13th Finance Commission reforms, in which the 13th FC, before giving special grants, made each of the ULBs, except for the lowest rung, promise, not just promise verbally, but the states were made to sign on these conditionalities, things like direct transfer of funds to the urban local bodies, things like having an ombudsman, things like the elections, regular elections to these local bodies. Now, these are absolutely the basic architecture of strengthening urban local bodies. However, the tragedy is that one of the most difficult things to do was the service level benchmarks for a very vital sector called sanitation, which today remains vital, as you can see from all the flagship schemes. What happened? The service level benchmarks had 28 indicators for 4 sectors. And these 4 sectors were urban water supply, urban sanitation, urban solid waste management, and stormwater drainage. And unfortunately, what really happened was that despite benchmarks, despite a whole architecture of indicators from which the urban local body was to fill online, this and the data also which was collected was actually examined by, for Himachal, it was ASCI. ASCI was looking after 10 states.
Last 1-2 minutes. For
Sorry.
the last 1-2 minutes for the opening remarks. We'll go to each one of us. Yeah.
Okay. So then, and what happened was that this data, the quality of data was examined so well, it was also color coded, that they asked me that does Nadon have swimming pools? I said, why? Because they said the benchmark is 135 LPCD of urban water supply, but your Nadon is reporting 700 LPCD. So it was a table exercise done by the executive officer over there. Now, that kind of architecture, where is it today? I leave it to the other panelists to examine this issue. Something which is good, creating that cost taxpayers money. Why is it fallen by the wayside? Now, I was very happy to know that localizing SDGs and data being the new oil is also a concern with the Niti Aayog. And fortunately, the Niti Aayog has done something about it in the sense of a state development index. Now, this work again has been done by Himachal in a district good governance index based on the Public Affairs Center, Bangalore. And we have already got indicators for about 75 indicators for nearly 30 sectors in place. And Niti Aayog is doing exactly the same architecture, and let us hope that the data tells its own story and evidence-based policy making is the result of that. So I think since the time is short, I would have actually mentioned our report on the, Tikenderji mentioned about the UDIF, Urban Development Infrastructure Fund. Now, unfortunately, this also is going to go through the Ministry of Housing. How it pans out is a matter of examination. Then the poverty elimination. These are all sectors in which the data doesn't really follow the kind of vision that is proposed in the Saptarishi. If you look at the gender-related schemes, there is no move to improve the participation of women in the workforce, whereas India is perhaps the only country in the neighborhood which has a falling rate of women's participation. So I will stop at this, and perhaps when we have the second round, then we can come to other issues which are scheme related. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, next we move on to Dr. Javed. Sir, can you take over?
Okay. Thank you so much. See whether I'm audible enough. Hello? Am I
Yes,
audible?
sir.
Yes, you are audible. Okay. Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to be part of this. First of all, we have to discuss something on local governance, and we are also talking about the budget. Usually, for a layman, the budget is not simply about numbers. It's also about giving a perspective on the future development strategies, strategies as well as the governance. And if you look at the budget person to find anything on local, first we have actually tried to see local governments as agencies of governments, the higher tiers of governments, which is again getting strengthened. And when you are also talking about local governance and local governments to the constitution, actually gives impetus on the state governments to strengthen local governments and local governance. And in order to do that, the state governments need to be strengthened. And with the GST regime on, we find in many states, the state governments are in crisis. And then you cannot expect much things to be there to strengthen local governments. And of course, the local governance also. This is the first part of the story. So even though when we call all this federalism and other things, federalism and other things, what actually leads us to what is there. For third part is when you look at the budget itself, we need to consider local governance in two aspects. One is the urban side and the rural side. With regard to the urban, I will just say that post 74 amendment, nobody has actually talked about urban local governance. Usually it is only infrastructure and development as part of urban development, not about urban local governance. That's exactly what the previous speaker also mentioned. You don't even have proper institutions for capacity development support for urban local governments in most of the states, barring a couple of states. Nowhere there are centers or institutions or training institutions or capacity development institutions or even support institutions for urban local governance. So that itself tells us the real story. And next is actually about the role of the local governments. What also, as we find in the budget also, there are schemes which are actually earmarked to be done at the local level, but they are all agency functions or kind of department functions, not about local governance functions. So those governance words are missing, the local governance words are missing in the budget at all. Fourth point is that many of most of our states have not devolved much funds of functionaries or functions to the local governments. Some of the flourishing cities and municipalities, the old team, they might have their own resources and others, but in order to strengthen local governments, the need for own source revenue mobilization is important. And we do not find anything to support own source revenue mobilization from this budget. And one more thing which has also happened is that with the GST regime on, many local governments have lost its major source of revenue, own source revenue. And there is no compensation so far. That's huge. Whether it is part of the octroi or many other things which many cities used to enjoy, all of them have gone. It's a huge loss to the local governments. Even while we are talking about compensating the state governments, we have not actually started thinking about compensating the local governments, whether it is the rural or the urban. Urban suffers a lot, and semi-urban rural governments also loses a lot, but we have not started thinking about that. This budget also don't provide. Because of the Central Finance Commission awards from say 13th Finance Commission, 2nd Finance Commission onwards, there has been some funds devolved to the or transferred to the rural local governments and recently to the urban local governments also. But it is all actually directly it is 50% tied, and the rest is also tied with lot of guidelines and other things. So again, the issue is that we do not have space for local governments to function as local governments. But on the other hand, some of the schemes which has been providing support, financial support to the rural local governments. panchayats use it. And they have been using it not only as a employment guarantee scheme, it's also about development and asset creation scheme. But as you have seen in this budget, the funds earmarked for the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme has been brought down, which is actually a direct step in this area, especially as we all know, this scheme, NGNRES, provided a lot of support during the COVID period, when many of other income generation activities or the livelihood activities were all curtailed. So it's actually going to be a great blow to the rural population by bringing down the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme funds. I would have also expected that this budget would focus on urban employment guarantee scheme. I was expecting that to come at some point of time, considering the success of whatever, with all limitations, the success of or MGNRES, one would expect urban employment guarantee scheme as we have in Kerala, where we have the Ayangali urban employment guarantee scheme. I was expecting that, but that is also not coming out in that. See, it would have actually given a little bit of support post to the urban poor population, especially post COVID, where a lot of disengagement, a lot of job losses, and all things have been happening. So this would have actually created some sort of support to the urban population, which has also not come. And the CFC grants, Center for Finance Commission grants, also nowadays come with a lot of ties and tax. And we have not been able to move forward with regard to our very urban areas and the urban areas, the
Sir,
urban,
your 8 minutes are over, so can you just wind up?
yeah. So urban agglomerations, which has also not been able to be implemented properly, there needs to be steps to do that also. So as the first step, I would conclude here with the point that we have never discussed about urban local governance itself, but only about development of some schemes and other things, and that too not to the tune in which we need to go further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Since Srinivas sir has to join another event at 7, so we'll go ahead with him.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear Dr. Joy, and thank you, IMPRI, for inviting all of us. It's now becoming an annual ritual, and I really appreciate being part of this conversation with such a diverse set of people that truly care about urban governance in India. Taking off from where Dr. Joy is coming from, in our country, budget is not merely a document of expenses and income, but it's also a policy document. So my comments today in the context of urban and the union budget should be seen more from a policy perspective rather than the allocations of schemes and numbers point of view. The biggest disappointment for me, as it is for every year after year, is that there is no wish or plan to change the governance model in India. We continue to operate in business as usual mode, which is not working for us, and yet there is no intent to transform the laws that govern the city. There is no intent to empower the cities, empower the mayors, the councillors, the councils, any of that will convert the ULB, the urban local body, into a city government. I think the moment we go from a local body to a city government, not only everything will change from a symbolic perspective, but also from the way that we do things in a decentralized way will begin to change. And I was hoping to see some indication of that in this. There are some indications in terms of capacity building, and it's as earlier speaker also mentioned, Doctor, she spoke eloquently about the capacity building. There are some positive things around capacity building that I noticed in thing. Why do I say that this budget doesn't talk about the urban governance in the way that we would expect it to? Because if you think about it, the real owners of the cities or states from a governance point of view are the state government. So we should be having these budget conversations when a state budget comes out, and then evaluate what is that got to do with the, what is the Delhi budget, or maybe that's a wrong example. What is the Maharashtra budget got to do with the cities of Maharashtra, and the Karnataka budget got to do with Bengaluru and so on. But unfortunate reality, again, as someone alluded to, Tikender, I think, is we don't even have basics inside. I am joining this call from Bengaluru, which is one of the fastest growing cities in the world, not just India. For more than 2.5 years, we have no council, no election to the city council, corporation. There is no mayor, there is no corporators. It is being run by the state government with an administrator. Same with the BMC, which is the biggest city of India with 50,000 crores annual budget, no elected representatives. So many cities in India are running for many years without the elected council. So on what basis do we say that we have a 3-tier governance and 74th Amendment being passed in 1993? It's been 30 years this year, and 30 years later, we have a lot of things on paper and nothing actually happening in the real life. So all of us that are interested in the urban sector must really introspect and see if there is a new way of democratic decentralization. Today, if you look at what's happening in the real world, a lot of people are interested in governance, particularly in the urban areas, not driven by passion, but out of necessity. Many more and more people are living in communities where there are group living, community living, a lot of apartments, for example, and they need to manage their garbage, they need to manage their water, and because the urban services are not uniformly available, they have to create their own models. In my considered opinion, this has led to a lot more participation of citizens in governance, albeit still at the upper middle class or upper middle class kind of communities, but nevertheless it is still interest in local governance. Now, all of this energy of knowing and maintaining services, communities, providing infrastructure and services for a smaller community can easily be extended beyond the literally the compound wall of the apartment to the ward, which is the unit of governance. I think the union budget has no role to play in it as such. It would be silly for us to discuss a state government budget in terms of defense spend, because defense spending is not at all the business of any state government. Similarly, the budget spend of a city is not in the purview of the union government. While everybody knows when the finance minister presents the budget, the color of the folder she carries and the halwa ceremony and the same fanfare accompanies for the state budget, hardly anybody blinks when a city budget of Indore is presented or a city budget of Shimla is presented. Nobody knows about that. Not even the citizens of Shimla are aware of how that budget is made and what goes into it and whether it has all the adequate funds needed for the development of the city. That's because our city governance is split between state and union with various schemes and all kinds of things that are not in sync with each other. Somebody says urban planning, somebody says smart city, somebody says, okay, the current budget mentions in urban sanitation. All cities and towns will be enabled for 100% mechanical desludging of septic tanks and sewer to transition from manhole to machine hole mode. Enhanced focus will be provided for scientific management of dry and wet waste. Very noble thoughts, great intent. But what exactly does the union government propose to do to make this happen? How does it plan to cover all of the manholes in this entire urban India of nearly 4,500 cities? Is it practically possible for the government of India to go to each city and go into each manhole and convert it into what is being described as a machine hole? Similarly, what can the union government do for scientific management of dry and wet waste? Shouldn't that be decentralized to the city government, the currently what we call the urban local body? If that is the intent, then what is the process? What is the framework in which that will happen? So the budget is quiet on that, and we don't know exactly how that is going to happen. And that's when what Dr. Joy said comes back, which is conditions, tied grants. You do this, then we give this. And as we all know, many of us that follow this, many of these conditionalities and grants that are based on certain conditions are never utilized by the cities. What does that tell us? That the more conditions you impose, the less usage that there is for such things. So we must learn from this experience of various things that we're trying. I'm not saying nothing should be done from the union government level. Swachh Bharat is a great success, in my opinion, in terms of building awareness for sanitation, cleanliness, in terms of waste management, all of that. Awareness building, building a citizen movement around things, all of that is a great job that the central government can do. And in the interest of the nation, they should be doing that. But in terms of implementation and execution, the farther they stay away, the better it is. And they must really insist on the state governments. They should organize conclaves and discussions like this on how we can decentralize more and more power to them. Capacities is the single biggest problem that the cities have in India. Most of the cities do not have enough engineers, do not enough people to manage the sewage treatment plant, and there's a lot of privatization happening. And the waste management, sanitation workers are always on the streets asking for better wages and protection in their employment. These are the areas where transformative laws need to be done. I'll end by saying that the biggest thing that I would expect the union government to do going into the election year, as Tikender ji has said in the beginning, they should attempt to bring radical reform for urban governance, at least in this coming year. It doesn't need to wait for the next budget. For example, we should entrust the mayors of the cities with financial powers, which they do not have today. We should abolish things like MP labs, which is so regressive and completely goes against the principles of 74th Amendment, and somehow brings the MLAs and MPs and legislatures at a union level to get involved with the city level work. We should be able to push towards a per capita level budgeting from a city to ward and the zone. When you do per capita level, most of the cities, what is happening is that the cities, the core area of the city will get the water and the drainage and the sewage and all of that, but outer areas are always left out. Because cities are growing, more and more surrounding areas are becoming part of the city. But there isn't equal, allocation for the outer areas. Just like we have developed states and underdeveloped states, we have developed wards and underdeveloped wards. And there is no policy framework for allocating more funds to them. And this needs to be addressed at a legislative level, in my opinion. And Dr. Joy brought up urban agglomeration. I completely agree with him. I think we should forget about 74th Amendment and think about an entirely new mode of metropolitan governance and small town governance. Metropolitan governance will be for the mega cities of India, which we should hope that there won't be too many, but we do have them and they are the engines of our economy. So therefore, there needs to be a governance model for metropolitan governance. And then there has to be a governance model for tier 2 and what we call tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which really focuses on empowerment of the local councillors, the mayor, and the council itself to be able to pass bylaws, to be able to collect funds, taxes from the citizens for the services that it provides. I think in the next year, if the government, union government, along with in the State Development Council, the Honorable Prime Minister and the Chief Minister should seriously discuss this with Niti Aayog might be the right forum for organizing all of this with many eminent experts that are also on this panel. This is what I would urge all of us to push, looking at yet another year of budget, which talks about some schemes here and there, but does not offer anything fundamentally different, anything that can change the lives of people in our cities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I now invite Dr. Javed to take over.
Thank you so much. So I think many issues have been covered. So primarily, I'm not going to repeat those. But here I would say that since the union budget was presented in Delhi, but still Delhi is struggling to get appointed a mayor. So this is the pathetic situation of the local government. But anyway, when we talk about the, linking local government with the union budget. So basically, if we talk about the public finance, so we have two, scope in terms of funding. like we have central schemes, we call it centrally sponsored and central sector schemes. And then the grants, constitutional grants, provided by the union government to the local governments. So these are the, like two major financing sources for the local government. But, when we assess about the, policies, provisioning or advocacy, so these things I think are missing. And already we have mentioned that, we all of them have mentioned that now we have entered into Amrit Kal, and the time period is for 25 years. So accordingly, we should also focus the vision and strategies of the government, but nowhere, local government have been mentioned. So primarily union budget talked about, opportunities for the citizens with a special focus on the youth, growth, job creation, strong, stable macroeconomic environment. So these are the major vision of the government, but I think the local governments are nowhere. Now, when we talk about the budgeting thing, and we can say that so many schemes and program of the central government is flowing towards local governments. But Joy and other panelists have already mentioned that there is a, no control or any kind of scope for the local governments when we talk about the centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes. However, we can discuss something about, we can say ritually. So looking at the Amrit Kal budget, if we, focus on the budget of the rural development ministry, so if we take the data into consideration in 2021-22 actual figure, if we take, so Ministry of Rural Development is spent around 1,60,000 crore. But in the budget 2023 and 24, the BE figure is around 1,57,000 crore. So if you go ahead and take the budget of the Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry, so for the same year, like 21-22 actual, it was around 1 lakh crore. Now it has, in this budget estimate, it is around 76,000 crore. There is a slight increase of the, budget in the budget of the Jal Jeevan Mission, but the biggest challenge, in the vision of the Amrit Kal budget was, focusing on the youth and the job creation. So already, we have mentioned that Narega has a huge cut, but when we talk about the, and we don't have any wage employment program for the urban areas, but earlier, we used to, implement National Urban Livelihood Mission. But in this budget, we have seen that there is no budget, actually, no budget allocation in the NRLM urban. So this is the pathetic situation in terms of job creation. And if we talk about the NRLM, so like Rural Livelihood Mission, so there is a slight increase in the budget. But as we are claiming that now we are facing the huge unemployment challenges, sorry. And for that, there is a need for big push, because already we have so many vacancies in the government departments, whether it is state government or the union government. So in that way, at least, National Rural Livelihood Mission and National Urban Livelihood Mission should have been given more focus, I would say. So those focus are missing in the budget, even in terms of policy, in terms of budget figures. And if we talk about the other kind of grants, like schemes, so we have Ministry of Panchayati Raj, it is alive. But when we see about the scheme, we don't have any scheme roughly except this Gram Swaraj Abhiyan. And there is one more, scheme for the expenditures. But though no allocation was made in the research, scheme, and the Gram Swaraj Abhiyan is hardly getting, less than around 800 crore. And we are saying that India is going to achieve the SDG by 2030, and we are not focusing on the rural areas. If we see this allocation for the capacitation of the entire country, and we are sensitizing, and we are training to our local representative in this meager amount, I think it is not going to achieve the stated objective of the Niti Aayog. And for this scheme, budget should have been more. So, and also I would say that Joy has already mentioned that there is a acute problem of this devolution of the funds, function and functionaries. So earlier through this scheme, we used to have some kind of incentive for the panchayats and states for to go forward and devolve the power to the gram panchayats. But now there is no focus of the union government in this regard, and we can say that the centrally sponsored schemes have been designed in such a way that the local governments do not have any scope in terms of engaging with planning, implementation and monitoring. Mainly line department are working on their behalf, and the Ministry of Panchayati Raj should have been the nodal ministry for pushing the idea of localization of SDG, and also doing some kind of advocacy on behalf of the local governments, so that states government could have done something to strengthening the local governments. So in that way, I would say that in terms of policy and in terms of budget, there is no focus. And I would also say that very few people, whether it is media, whether it is civil society, or in the policy making, the focus of the local government has never been to make them empower, to make them work as the 73rd and 74th amendment envisaged long back. So I will end here, but I will take some question. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we move on to Mr. Sameer.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah, I
please.
think, I would thank you for the opportunity. I think just for the benefit of the viewers, and I thought I would read out some of the numbers of the budget, because as we are discussing the budget, we need to what are the numbers, because when you discuss budget, you have to discuss the budget speech and discuss the numbers in the demands on grants. So I think regarding the budget speech of the Honorable Finance Minister, I think para number 53, 54, 55, and 56 were specifically dealt with the issues of cities. I think para 53 talked of sustainable cities, then taking urban planning reforms, efficient use of land, adequate resource to urban infrastructure, and of course the availability of and affordability of urban land. Then para 54 of the Honorable Minister's speech dealt with the property tax reforms and ring fencing of the user charges, and incentivizing to improve the creditworthiness of the municipal bonds. Para 55 of the speech dealt with the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund to be managed by the National Housing Bank, and was to be used for the infrastructure development of tier 2 and 3 cities, and 10,000 crores have also been allocated for that, and will be dealt in leveraging with the funds of 15th Finance Commission, the existing schemes, and appropriate user charges framework. And para 56 of the speech dealt with the mechanical desludging of septic tanks and sewers, and enhanced focus on scientific management of the solid and liquid waste. I think there are other two paras I felt also dealt with the urban issues. I think one was para 86 which talked about the green credit to be given under the environmental ministry to the actions taken in environmental responsible, I think environmental actions of the urban local bodies. And I think para 48 of the speech also dealt with the infrastructure finance secretariat, in which the urban infrastructure was also involved into that. Regarding the demand on grants, which normally, of course, have been circulated in the bill. Of course, it is only in bill stage. And after the deliberations, the Union Parliament would be taking its decision on that. But the general figures, as was also mentioned by Dr. Saab, was around 76,000 crores is the allocation for the the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Out of which, as we know, in the nomenclature, the language and the grammar of budgets is quite complicated. Actually, it's innumerable pigeonholing in the major budget and the minor budget head, and then the detailed budget heads, and then of course there are secretariat services, non-secretariat services, central sector schemes, and centrally sponsored schemes, and the understanding the budget language and budget grammar is also quite an exercise. And of what I could decipher out of it was that the central sector schemes came out to be around 26,000 crores. I'm not giving the detailed numbers, but I think the broader numbers to have our viewers a bit of clarity as to what the budget as far as the urban ministry is concerned. Around 26,000 crores, 26,500 crores, I think, is for the central sector schemes, which basically of that 23,000 crores approximately is for the metros. I think 3,500 is for the CPWD, which probably could be for the Central Vista, and the centrally sponsored schemes, we have got 46,000 crores. So in the centrally sponsored schemes, the PMAY is for 25,000 crores. The Amrut mission is for 8,000 crores. The Smart City mission is for 8,000 crores, and actually 7,700. The cities under the French program is 350 crores. And thus we briefly have the centrally sponsored schemes of 46,000 crores, the central sector schemes of around 26,000 crores, and that would generally make up most of the union budget as far as the grants, which of course will be discussed within the by the honorable members. Taking into view of this broader canvas of the financial resources that are getting allocated into the through the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. This is another very interesting point that I think we had discussed in earlier years budgets also, I remember. And an article by Ramana, I came across an article by Dr. Ramana Cha, who had been a very senior officer, Commerce, as officer, the secretary, the Metropolitan Commission, also someone who had worked in UN Habitat. So he had an experience of working from local bodies to state government to union government to UN agency. And his article, I came across his article, and I'm just referring to it. And a very interesting point he made out was that there are many measures which are not exactly in the budget demands of the Ministry of Housing Affairs, but it is can be inferred that various demands of other ministries are also be having impact on the issues with the urban areas and also with the local bodies. And I think he had mentioned 8 points. I thought I will just repeat it for the benefit of our viewers. That one was the digital public infrastructure that is enhanced could be tagged up with the smart city framework. Second, of course, was the PM Atmanirbhar Swasthya Bharat Yojana, of which having the nursing colleges with the medical college. For most of these medical colleges, as we are aware, are located in urban centers. Third, I think, was the reviving of the 50 airports and the heliports and the water ports, which are also being supported. Second was the reduction of carbon efforts, which were it's a policy, because the budget is just not a number game. It's also policy statements and preferences of the executive, and of course, when it is formed into an act, by vicariously, it's also a will of the people. And in that sense, I believe the budget is not to be taken only as some ritual. It has a much grander significance, and I believe any act by any entity of 45 trillion rupees can't be trivial. It has a lot of significance, a lot of importance, and therefore this curiosity and this efforts of IMPRI of taking these to the people by the series, I think is really commendable and should be supported in all ways. Coming back to the other budgetary allocations of other ministries which could have influence on urban and city issues, I believe was the preferences were made was a reduction of carbon intensity. Then was the green building element which was mentioned. Scrapping of old vehicles can impact on the urban the pollution. The 75 compressed biogas plants which will be coming up in the urban sector, I think is also an important issue. Second, I believe was the misty mangroves for the coastal cities could be important. And the most important, one of the important element which I thought in the budget, which probably, should be discussed, is that for the first time, all the authorities have now been made eligible for the income tax exemption. I think is a very, very important point. Earlier, I was working with a Metropolitan Development Authority, and I think we were fighting that's I'm referring to 12 years back, actually, when I was working in the Metropolitan Authority. And since then, we had our income tax tribunals and cases and the commissioner appeals and tribunals, and maybe then the higher judiciary regarding the income tax, which was shown as earnings of the authority. Therefore, this action of tax exemptions, statutory bodies who are working in infrastructure is just not urban for any such authorities. I believe is a very, very important steps. And of course, the 50-year loans for the capital expenditure, which is coming, interest-free loans coming to the state government, I believe have a substantial utility when we are talking of the broader urban aspects of the in context of this budget. I believe the policy preferences which have been given as far as the planning, continuing the planned reforms is concerned. I believe, we were 25,000 crores 3 years back. As for the centrally sponsored schemes, I think 20, if I am not wrong, it is 2021. I believe there was a tremendous, statements regarding the urban affairs, like I think Swachh Bharat 2 of 1.4 lakh crore was announced, 2021 Jal Jeevan Mission Urban of 2.87 lakh crores, metros of 1.5 lakh crores, and the 15th Finance Commission of 1.25 lakh crores, which almost 7 lakh crores were announced as far as the 5-year plan for the 5 years, so to say. So I believe when we are trying to decipher a union budget and its relevance and significance to the urban India and to local bodies. I believe when we take this approach, I think one, of course, we have to understand that the union budget and the union list and the local bodies and the municipalities, there are, of course, the peculiar frameworks, constitutional framework that we have. And it will always be, referred to, but I somehow feel we're trivializing union budget vis-a-vis urban India and maybe urban local bodies. I won't be very comfortable with that kind of narration into that. Secondly, I believe that when we are looking at what exactly will be happening in next year, because this is, of course, this is a 1-year financial plan that we're having, and in that case, I feel although a budget is a 1-year plan, it has to be seen in a continuation, and therefore I do find there is a certain continuities between the earlier budgets and what we are seeing now, and therefore there has to be we have to acknowledge that there is going to happen some continuity. B, any action of any entity, let it be government or public sector or NGO, anybody, there will always be a half glass full. Something will be good, and something always can be done better. So whenever I feel we discuss the financial budgeting, the single most financial act of any entity in India for that matter, 45 trillion rupees, I believe there has to be, when we are considering, yes, there are some things which need to be done more, could be done better, could be done otherwise, some other allocation, other priorities. Of course, it's a matter of preference is going to happen. But by and large, I believe the direction of the financial allocations to the way this not only urban ministry, but to various other ministries, which are going to have a significant impact on urban India, and therefore also on the synergies, which, as was rightly mentioned earlier, that the state government budget also need to have, and also the urban local bodies. Because I think there are certain issues, of course, broader political scientists, which would be finding in urban India, the options, the challenges, the various measures that could be taken, not be taken, should be taken, or could have been taken. That of course will be continuing. But I believe we are now at a very at a very defining stage of history. I believe that this decade is going to be extremely crucial. This decade is to define what India would be in maybe the next generation of India will be decided on what we'll be doing now. And maybe the language itself of grammar is so, and the language and grammar of budget making, as I keep on saying, the budget heads and minor budget heads and detailed budget heads, and the release of the grant, the release of the budgetary allocation, its execution is a measure, which I think has to be done more speedily now. The governance will have to be much more, faster. And it's up to people like me, actually, who are still, trying to work here and deliver to the citizens much more fast. I believe one element that is there. And regarding the capacity building, I think the mission Karma Yogi, which was when we started with the capacity building commission, which is having the capacity commission, and the mission Karma Yogi, which is happening, I believe is also eligible for all the sectors. And in fact, we are seeing many such, I think, a lot of outreach happening for that from the capacity commission. In fact, to various state governments, they are reaching out to the state government agencies and also the various training institutes that we are having. So broadly, I feel that this 45 trillion action, the punch of 45 trillions, which will be having in this Indian economy, and the various measures it is suggesting, I believe there has to be more synergy now. I think these three levels of government and the various budget heads and the various departments and various, the attached officers, the subordinate officers, the mission officers, the NGOs, the public sector will have to find some synergy, some methodology for that. I have great hope on the digital prowess that India is building. And I think there's something that we should make the fullest efforts of that. Of course, if there are some limitations, then can always be improved upon. So this, trying to remove the internal, the delays and frictions and overlaps and gaps within the various actions which the government and associated agencies are taking is something which we'll have to improve upon, I believe, over the period of time. And I think the digital public infrastructure is something which is going to definitely help with this happen. And I think I thought I would share that there's a very good report which has come from the Reserve Bank of India, I think in November 22 last year, just 3 months back. And I think it's first kind of such report of the state of municipal finances that has come from Reserve Bank, as far as I know. Of course, there must have definitely been more. But I read this report just 2-3 months back, and I think this is giving us a very good picture as to how we are going to connect, to have a synergy between the actions as well as financial actions of the three levels of government, and also the various departments and organizations which are working into it. I think one very good effort I thought was the Gati Shakti framework, can be extended to various other sectors also, and also the urban sector, in which it enables us to have a greater information flow between the action that we've taken. It is, of course, more project-centric, but even the financial actions which are to be taken can be portalized in that way. And I believe this measures can give us a greater impetus and greater impact as far as the citizens are concerned. So, I thought I would be more specific with the numbers and the points which I had, collected with the help of course, Arjun helped me in collecting that. So I thought I would share that with our viewers also, to have more clarity as to what a union budget actually is. And of course, the analytical part of that, I think our esteemed panelists have given all their interpretations and their analysis of it, which of course will be on the viewers to look onto it. I personally feel that these actions need to be more coordinated, one point on the National Urban Livelihood Mission that the budget head probably is not shown. I think I feel there is some alternative program which probably, is maybe there has to be probably find some information about some alternative program is happening or alternative measures which have been thought of because the Urban Livelihood Mission framework was almost something which came first in 1982. If I'm not mistaken, when this urban community development programs were started in 1982, it was, I think, a centrally sponsored program then. So I think this enthusiasm and of curiosity of knowing the union budget, I think is very important. And I must compliment IMPRI for taking this pains and efforts to organize a series of such webinars, which I hope will be providing better awareness among the citizens. And citizenry, of course, has to be more and more, aware of the actions which are taken. I think that's more important. And probably we will have to make efforts to, have much more readable and understandable, budgets in future for the citizens. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like Tikender sir to give his final remarks.
Do we have any question there? I couldn't see any question in the Q&A box. Maybe Dr. Purnima wants to respond to something. Let her please do that first, and then I'll take the It
has been a very wide, encompassing, and interesting dots, presented by all these erudite panelists, and that brings exactly to the point that just now when Samirji was mentioning the different budget provisions at different paragraphs, that is exactly it. When it comes to urban planning, architecture, or urban policy making, why is it only dots? So today, what he actually did mention was we need to connect the dots. So when we need to do that to get a comprehensive picture of where are we and where do we want to be, perhaps the best thing is that we already have an architecture which is being pushed down to a local level, and that is the Sustainable Development Goal architecture. So do we need to deviate from that, or do we need to mainstream into that to reap the synergy of intersectionalities of schemes which are specifically urban oriented and those which impact the urban areas invariably? For example, that when we are looking at these cities, the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where the action is 40% growth and other things, what are the reasons for this growth? And that is exactly where the targeting should be. The reasons are that you have low cost land, you have a pool of talent which is unexploited and raring to go, and you have excellent low cost labor available. And in any case, I mean, the digital economy has made them link up very easily. Now, there are so many, and health is okay. There is infrastructure which is being created over there, mobility infrastructure. Now, all these are concerns and all these are visibilities. Can we connect them? Can we sort of have this localizing of SDG as strategy, as a ready-made strategy, that while doing this, we kill two birds with one stone? In other words, when we don't have an architecture where the trickle down actually happens, can we use this localizing as a methodology in which our context specific trickle down happens for each ULB? So it is a tough job. It's a very tough job, but it will meet all the concerns which very nicely Sameer Unhaleji mentioned about Ramanath Jha's 8 points. Very relevant. I've read that. And it's also, it gives us a manner of engaging and appreciating the fact that municipalities today, do you know what they're called upon to address? If you want to access the UIDF funds, user charges. You have to understand user charges. You have to engage consultants for transport-oriented development, for TDRs, transferable development rights. I mean, understanding these is a challenge for many other, and then you have challenge funds to access funds. Now, if these capacity building needs are factored in while doing the SDG architecture, then you will marry both. And you will have a vertical linkage from local to global. So this is the basic point which I wanted to make. It has been very interesting hearing everybody.
Okay, so before I make the final comments, is any one of our panelists there who would like to, make some 1 minute kind of intervention, or maybe crisscross what the other panelists have said?
So we can go to each panelist once.
Yeah, maybe a minute each. I mean, the final comments, or
Yes,
whatever.
sir.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
So ma'am has already stated, and maybe we can go to Dr. Javed is there. Joy. Dr. Joy, hi.
Hello.
You're at the railway station, I guess, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
So, okay, I wanted to just add one more point. See, basically, when we are all talking about the sustainable development goals, and especially for the 2030, and also many of the in the rural sector, the Ministry of Panchayat has come up with a localizing indicator framework and other things, which a lot of efforts have been done. But we'll have to see what happens at the local level, because finally it is also about the funds which are still transferred. But still, there is an attempt. But when it comes to the urban local governments, there is no such effort from any corner. And people actually just think about the SDG, the goal on cities, but all other goals are applicable to cities. We forget that poverty, hunger, health, education, everything is applicable to city, and not just the resilient cities as a separate thing. So if you are looking forward looking, we also need to consider what are we aiming at, especially in the framework of SDGs. That would have been good. Thank you.
Great. So who wants to go next? Sameerji, please.
Yeah, actually, I would. I always felt that the challenges that we'll be facing in this decade and coming decade will be something will be different what we did earlier. I mean, from 1990 to probably 2020 was one chunk of the challenges that our generation faced in a way. But the way things are moving, maybe in 2030, 2035, 2040, I see a totally different set of urban challenges evolving, and our preparedness for that, like climate change, our adaptation, mitigation, what could probably something something could be could have to be searched there. What is available? Maybe we are looking at inclusion. It's going to be very important. There's the geopolitical challenges, the disasters, the framework, what would happen. So I think the urban India of 2030 and 2040 is going to be absolutely different than what we had from 1980 to 2020. That's one we'll have, and I believe the union budget is a very good instrument to use to enhance the preparedness, because it has the wherewithal, unlike the state and the local body budgets. Number one. Number two, as for the SDGs, I just thought I would share an experiment that we had done in a smart city where I was working 5-6 years back. Of it, from the SD, we did a mapping of SDGs. It is the goals and the targets and indicators. I think there were 169 targets. And we had taken help of IIT Bombay, and we had done a match the following sort of exercise between the indicators of SDG and the functions, the act obligatory and the discretionary functions of the act that we have. And I felt we almost had, and then we did an exercise of the budget. The municipality budget was mapped on the SDGs, and that I think that exercise was very interesting. And we realized that the 90% of our expenditure does connects to one or either of the SDG targets. So I think that was that I will just share that, because I think I believe that it is the grander view of our constitution makers in view of the principles and the broader welfare framework of welfare governance that was brought in, that we actually covered most of the SDGs, even within, in fact, our constitutional framework. And probably it's an acceptance, a global acceptance of the welfare model that India brought right from the making of the Constitution of India. That's I thought I would just share that. So thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Sameerji. Dr. Javed.
Yeah, thank you, Tikender ji. My final comment will be that first of all, that Government of India and states government should consider the local government as their partners, not their work agencies. And I would say that we have, opportunity in terms of implementation of SDGs. But whatever, public provisioning and finances we are having, I think they are not very much aligned with the need and the word transformation. So just I will, give one example that is still Government of India has not increased the pension amount of disabled people, old age people and widows. So accordingly, we have this kind of provisioning in midday meal, in ICDS. So this charity mode should stop and we should focus on the development mode. Otherwise, we cannot say that we are going to achieve the SDG, by 2030. And the role of government should be integral to the SDG, because we have only the only framework at the national level, which that is the SDG. And Niti Aayog should also do something in this regard, and the civil society should also come forward. We people like researcher and academician, we should do much more what we have done previously during the MDGs. So thank you so much, and we keep discussing it.
Just one small point. Just
Please,
one.
please, just not more than a
just
minute.
1 minute.
Yeah,
That's it. That very important point that Dr. Javed just raised, that do away with subsidies and other things, no charity. Very important is when you have the phenomena of urban aggregators, which is a very important thing. It doesn't have constitutional legitimacy, but it is like agglomerations and aggregators have a cost benefit impact because of economies of scale. So let's use that.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Purnima, Sameer Unaleji, Dr. Javed, and Dr. Joy, and of course, Srini, who had to join some other meeting. I'm really quite ambiguous now, because I came with a very clear thought, but yeah, hearing my panelists, I think, and that's what we are. I mean, someone rightly pointed out, cities are workshops of civilization. Actually, we are. And this civilization has to go on and on. And urbanism can be, I think, regarded as a particular form of patterning of social processes. So, there are different processes that are going on. Well, just to make our viewers understand this whole process, because we have two bunch of panelists here. One who still believe, and I mean not believe, but who believe in the mainstreaming of the SDGs. In like Dr. Purnima said, intersectionality, still have great faith in the system. And then we have another who are a little top layered. There's a friend of mine who is there in the ministry, Mr. Sanyal and that gang I call, who thinks, I mean, it's just the capital, private capital, and which is going to lead us into, what Sameerji was rightly pointing out, what will be the future of the cities. And we have another third group of, but unfortunately, we do not have a single panelist from that group who says sustainability for whom. Is it so? I mean, they just completely trash the idea of the SDGs. They say, is it sustainability of capital or is it sustainability of people? I just leave it for our participants to be just open-minded to this whole question, because what will be the vision? What will be the future? I remember Madam Finance Minister last year stating that and really pointing out this. I remember every bit of the speech that she made. This time also, I heard every bit of the speech and all the paras that were pointed out by Sameerji. And last year she said, this form of urbanization cannot sustain. We require a new paradigm. I thought there will be a new paradigm in the current budget. Unfortunately, I did not find that. What Sameerji was mentioning, one document, in fact, I've read another document, that's the RBI report. And in fact, both the documents, after reading the documents, I wrote two different articles and both apparently were published in the Hindu. One is the RBI report, which once again, what Sameerji was pointing out, very rightly points out, empowering the local governments, empowering the cities. And there's another very interesting document just brought out a few weeks back from the World Bank that says it's $840 billion that's required if to sustain your urban, the urbanism, because I find urbanism and the city two different entities. Urbanism is more to do with the social process. City is more of an infrastructure development part. So if you have to sustain your cities, it's $850 billion, which translates to some 70 lakh crore rupees. Where is this money going to come from? The current model, I mean, and that's why I brought in, the whole question of expenditure vis-a-vis the GDP growth. If we do not grow, and so at the end, what I focus is the whole question of, even if we are growing, are we redistributing it? So why just the push for metro? I mean, what man was pointing out, Kochi, there's no point. And I remember Joy ji is here. I hope Joy, Dr. Joy is here. Please listen it out, Dr. Joy. So when a delegation from Kochi went to meet the then urban development minister, the Kochi mayor was a UDF, that's the Congress government. And at the center, there was a Congress government, Mr. Jayapal Reddy. And one of the current mayor of Kochi, who happens from the CPIM. And so all of them in a delegation went to meet Mr. Jayapal Reddy and said, please give us money so that we can have, metro in Kochi. You know what Jayapal Reddy told to the current mayor? I mean, he's the current mayor, Dr. Anil. He said, I can understand the Congress people demanding metro in Kochi, but you are communists. How can you demand a metro, which is highly taxed, so the point is, I think these contestations are taking place at I find these forums to be more of those contestations instead of, one side. So why should you have a metro in Jaipur? I mean, and that is never going to come, that is never going to be a profitable entity. Nowhere in the world except two cities you have metros. So which means you're cross-subsidizing, you are taxing the poor and giving it. So with these words and, with a hope, of course, because as I said, cities are workshops of civilization. The civilization has to advance for better human beings. Cities are for us. We are, I mean, and cities are like kind of entities which should guide the civilization process further, but which should be, as many of our friends have pointed out, very inclusive, which has to be very participatory, and the kind of alienation that we've seen the last couple of years, particularly decades, is not a good sign. I think that is where we have to intervene in the whole process of city making. We have to build these cities, not the large tech consultants. And I think with this, I would like to end. Thank you so much, Sameerji, Dr. Javed, ma'am, Purnima ji, and of course, Anchal for being there. Arjun, I think you can take the floor. I think we can finish off with this. Thank you so much.
Right. So now I invite Anchal to propose a vote of thanks. Anchal, over to you.
Thank you, sir. As we come to end of today's discussion, I, Anjal Karnani, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, and IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute for today's deliberation, panel discussion on local governance and the Union Budget 2023-24. We are grateful to our chair and moderator, Shri Tikender Singh Panwar, and panelist Dr. Joy Elamon, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, Mr. Srinivas Alavilli, Dr. Javed Alam Khan, and Mr. Sameer for taking part and enlightening us. We also thank all our participants who actively participated in today's celebration. You may also find more discussions on local governance in our IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, Local Governance, and other thematic series. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We also invite you to IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of union budget for the year 2023-24, being organized from 2nd to 7th of February 2023. Wishing you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.